All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fed GFLEC Financial Literacy Seminar, our last seminar for the semester. We're pleased to have Dr. Carlos Avenancio-León from UC San Diego to present his work on racial inequality in property assessments. Throughout the talk, please feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A box. We'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the talk. May ask some of the questions sort of throughout the talk, and then at the end, I will have some time for any additional questions. So I will stop there and take it away, Carlos.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you all for being here. I'm excited to be talking with you and looking forward to your questions. Today I'm presenting work with True Power from University of Utah. In here, what we are evaluating is the inequalities that arise in the property taxation setting because of differences in assessments of the value of the property. And let me step back and elaborate on that. If you big picture think about what are the large forms of taxation in the United States, you can think about sales taxes, income taxes, and property taxation. Imagine for a second that two people go to the same store, make the same purchase. You should expect that they will pay the same amount in sales taxes. If instead you see that taxation, sales taxes change based on personal traits, you will find that surprising. So what we show in this paper is that if you hold property taxes fixed, racial and ethnic minorities in the US face a higher property tax burden. And I will show you that there's two channels that are like driving this effect. One of them is at the neighborhood level, and one of them is at the individual level. And I won't have time to elaborate on this today, but this is a problem that is solvable, and I will at least mention what is a potential solution. Not saying that this is the best solution that we can implement, but to say that there's at least something we can do to correct for this inequality. So. Just to motivate this a little bit, property taxation is one of the main sources of taxation in the United States. It's probably the main source for local governments. It's the one we rely for school, roads, public safety. In total, if you think about how much is the revenue that you generate from property taxation, is around $500 billion. So it's quite a bit. And this also connects a little bit to differences in wealth that individuals have. And in the context of this paper, there's about racial differences in property taxation. This will have direct implications in the difference wealth by race that we have in the United States. We know that the median Black household has around $13,000 in net worth, which is like about 10 times lower than white household. And then when I explain how this racial gap happens, you will notice that this is also connected to the problem of institutional and statistical algorithmic bias. So I will show you that part of the problem why we have this different burden in property taxation arises because you have problems in the form the valuations are made, in the algorithms that form the valuations of homes in a way that disproportionately affects Black communities. So I want to explain a little bit why we have something like this happening in a system, even if you control for property tax rate. When I was talking about the example about sales taxes, it's very, very hard to imagine how it would happen that two people making the same purchase have different forms of taxation. But the key difference in that context is the value of the asset, which is seen at the point of sale, is observed directly when the tax is levied. But in the context of housing, that's very hard to do. If you have a home, you want to tax the home at its market value, but you only observe the market value when you sell the property. You don't see the market value of the home every time you want to tax it. So instead, the value of the home is based on an assessment value. So now if I step back and I imagine the tautological tax rate, it would be something like the market rate M times the rate, that's the tax bill, divided over the market value of the home. That will give you just the effective tax rate. This looks very simple, but in practice, we don't observe the market value of the home. So instead, we rely on an assessment value. And if this assessment value is different, for two different individuals, you will see that taxation can be different for two individuals because now the effective tax rate is not only a function of the policy tax rate, that's intended taxation, now the effective tax rate is going to be a function of the intended tax rate and the assessment ratio. And if you have the assessment ratio is larger for one person than is for another, you will have that the effective tax rate is also going to be higher for that person. So now what we're going to be concentrating today is in showing you how this assessment ratio is systematically higher for minority communities than it is for majority communities. And we're going to do this at a within taxing jurisdiction level. By that I mean is I will make sure that when I'm comparing different neighborhoods and different homes, they are compared inside all the potential overlapping taxing authorities. That includes counties, cities, school districts, utility districts, and so on. So everything, all the set of amenities, public good provision, and taxing practices are going to be held constant throughout today's work. So the summary of this paper is as follows. Like what we do is we form tax jurisdiction, what I just told you right now, the overlapping set of governments, with the intention of holding fixed intended taxation, public goods, and assessment practices. This is challenging because the way governments interact is in very complicated ways, and we have multiple layers of government, local governments interacting with each other. But what we're going to do is use Shapefile for the universe of all local governments and try to create all the potential levels of overlap. Once we have that, we're going to form assessment ratios using annual assessment data for over 100 million homes and over 53 million observed price transactions. And this is important. When I see the assessment ratio in our data, I will see the assessment and I will also see the price. And that's the way we can actually make this evaluation. And after that, I'm going to merge that data with homeowner race and ethnicity that comes from HAMDA. And the objective is trying to see if there's systematic variation in the assessment ratio, which is equivalent to rejecting a null of the tax being implemented equitably. So before I start showing you the analysis, like let me show you first a map of Philadelphia. So if you see Philadelphia, for example, if you have equitable taxation, it would be a very boring map. In this heat map, everything looks the same. In practice, how this looks is as follows. You have the center of Philadelphia has higher levels of taxation. And then you see here in the southeast, you have lower level of taxation. And then you have different varying levels of taxation throughout. In this heat map, like having brighter red means like you have higher taxation. Now let's compare that with how the demographics in Philadelphia look like. You look at the demographics of Philadelphia, you see you also have more Hispanics, exactly in those places, more minorities, exactly in those places where you have higher levels of taxation. And where you have lower levels of taxation, you have lower levels of amenities. You can see that also in Cook County, it's where Chicago is. You have the realized assessment ratio is going to be higher here in the center of the city, which is exactly where you have higher share of minority communities. And this is a pattern that is observed throughout the whole United States. There will be varying levels of like how intense the inequality is, but it's like a general problem. And what we find when we do the analysis for the whole United States is that minorities pay 10 to 13% more on property taxes than the white counterparts. And that can be quite a bit of money. For some individuals, this will be up to $800 annually, that if we are familiar with the literature on eviction, for example, those $800 can be the difference between being in a poverty trap or escaping a poverty trap. We divide that 10 to 13% inequality into two main components. One of them, The first one is 6 to 7%, and it's related to the neighborhood where you live. So if you are a Black person living in a Black neighborhood, you're going to pay that extra 7%. But if you're a white person living in that neighborhood, you're also going to pay that 6 to 7%. Because the burden of this first channel is on minority neighborhoods, regardless of the race of the individual. Then we also document a second component, which is the individual component. That is, regardless of the composition of the neighborhood, if you are a minority, you're going to pay 5 to 6% additional in taxes. And if the worst example, the worst case would be that you're a Black person in a Black neighborhood, in which case you will end up paying your 13% higher property tax. Now, and last, this inequality can be correctly very easy by correcting for home price growth in this particular neighborhood. You can create an algorithm that creates assessments that I call synthetic assessments, where these synthetic assessments are just based on the initial valuation of a property and then adjustment by home price growth over time, and that eliminates most of the inequality we find. I'm going to skip this. Something I want to remark is in the United States, the property tax is an ad valorem system, and by that means is that the core structure of the property taxation system is proportional to the value of a home. So, and this is, you can distinguish this from other alternative systems that have existed in the past in the United States. For example, cost basis approach to property taxation, where you levy a tax not on the market value of the property, but in the cost of the material that in the land that you require to have your property. In the United States, it's ad valorem, means market value. It means that to get the property tax right, you have to get the property tax value, the market value of the property right. That's the objective. And here, I give you an example of one code in the United States. So for Georgia, the ad valorem taxation of property states as follows. It says, except as otherwise provided in this code, taxable tangible property shall be assessed at 40% of its fair market value and shall be taxed according to 40% of the property's fair market value. There's two concepts that are important in this topic. First is the concept of fair market value. That's what states that the property tax is ad valorem. And second is this curve of the system where the taxation applies only to a percentage of the fair market value. And the reason why this is important is because in the United States, in most localities, you will never try to get an assessment that is exactly 100% of the value of the property. That's the natural assessment benchmark. But you don't have that in the United States. Instead, you have another arbitrary number to which the tax will be applied. And we, to make this analysis, need to make sure that we control for this. And there's reasons why this is the case. There's political economy reasons why this is the case that we can discuss later if you want. Now, before I go to the analysis, I want to explain again the concept of how assessments are done, having a target assessment ratio in place. Remember, I said in the Georgia code, you have 40%. That's what the assessors are trying to target. You have an intended taxation, the policy rate of 5%. So if you want to see what is the effective tax rate, what you will have is the home value, in this example, $200,000, times the target assessment ratio. So the accurate assessment, the inaccurate would be $80,000, not 280. The tax bill will be 5% of the 80,000, so that's $4,000. And that means that the effective tax rate is 2%. It's not 5, it's 2%. Now, to see the role that inaccurate assessments have on the effective tax rate, we can just imagine that you're over-assessing one property. Instead of 80%, you put 80,000, you put 85. And you have a second home that is worth, therefore double, and has an assessment of 150,000 instead of 160. So in this case, you will get a tax bill of $4,200 for one home, $7,500 for the other. But if you see the effective tax rate, it's going to be higher in the place where the assessment was actually overvalued, and lower in the second home. So the point that this example is trying to make is the variation in this assessment ratio will be sufficient to create this unequal tax burden. So the challenge we have in this study is to be sure that we are holding all these particular terms, like the target assessment ratio 40% fixed. As I said, the natural benchmark of 1-to-1 is uncommon in the United States. And then we want to hold fixed all the intended level of taxation, public goods, assessment practices, and so on. In order to do that, as I mentioned before, we take all the potential overlap of different taxing entities. That includes, again, like utility districts, school districts, cities, counties, and so on. And we have over 75,000 of them. The way we do it is as follows. So we, in order to have what is the particular taxing jurisdiction, we will literally get the overlap of each particular taxing entity, and each of them are going to be a different jurisdiction. And we're going to compare homes only within each of those jurisdictions. For example, if I want to see, if I have a home here, that the home here in jurisdiction 2 will only be compared about other homes that are also subject to the county and city, but not to homes that are subject to county, city, and school district. So that way we have our comparison of home to homes well defined. And we are going to do this in a year-by-year basis. Because assessment practices and intended provision of public goods and taxation changes over time. So now that we have all these concepts defined, we, as I mentioned before, we use data on all potential transactions from 2003 to 2016. We have annual assessments. All this information comes from Atom. Other data sources are similar out there, like CoreLogic. We don't include California in this paper, but we do have in that separate paper if you're interested in knowing. The reason is because of Proposition 13 generates too many distortions to the point that we don't want to, that they will have the inequality that comes in California have different mechanisms from the ones that I'm suggesting in this paper here. And then we merge these to raise data from HAMDA and demographic data from ACS in the SNC. So some details about the timing. When we observe a transaction, we will observe it, for example, a year T. This is where how a sale point T, we observe the market price of the home. And then we obtain the race and ethnicity from our merging HAMDA, and we observe a second transaction. And at that point, we have the most recent assessment, the transaction of the home that is realized, is observed, is not estimated. And then we have the ethnicity that we got from the previous transaction. So that's like how we are able to observe all these moving parts. What we actually want to reject is the idea that there's equitable taxation. So if we have an assessment ratio and we are controlling, this is fixed effect for the jurisdiction year. If we're controlling for jurisdiction year, it means that we're controlling for intended level of public good provision and intended in taxation and assessment practices. If we control for all those things over here, the natural benchmark to see whether or not it's equitable taxation is that if we include a dummy of having race or ethnicity, this beta has to be 0. If this beta is not 0, then the inequality, the taxation is not equitable. So we are going to reject that null today. And important to say, from the legal perspective, it is sufficient to find an outcome of discrimination of a difference in rate in taxation to find a discrimination claim in the United States in housing, because the standard in housing is disparate impact, it's not intentional level of discrimination. So this is our core finding of the paper. We find that for a Black mortgage holder that comes from HAMDA, the assessment ratio would be around 12.7% higher for Black mortgage holders. And for minorities, that would be around 9.8%. So this for the median minority homeowner that will have a home of around $200,000, the additional tax burden will be around $300 to $390 more annually. Over here, we can see variation in the assessment ratio over time. I used to live in Indiana. Indiana has the best performance. So there's very specific reason why that's the case in Indiana. Here, I was talking earlier with Erin. Here's Kentucky. That has like quite a large level of inequality as well, but it's more or less in place with the national averages. And DC is not in this study because we only include the states, but DC also has high levels of inequality. We have done the analysis in different sides from the paper. So now that we have that level of inequality well documented, we would like to decompose this inequality. And we want to decompose it into what components come from location and what components come from individual attributes within the neighborhood. So in order to do that, we just would like to be able to see if we could randomize having the same person in a home. We cannot do that. So the next strategy we can do is see how the assessment gap evolves over time as you start narrowing and narrowing more the geographical scope of where we are focusing. To be more explicit about that, we can actually have a jurisdiction, which is, even if it's smaller than a city or a county, is still a fairly large geographical unit, and we can reduce it to something more like tract and so on. So here's the estimates I showed you before. This control for jurisdiction, which is the most natural way to control because it's the one that controls for everything, for all the taxation and public good provision. But we can go to something smaller that resembles more a neighborhood, and that would be the tract level. And you see that the inequality decreases quite a bit when you go to a smaller geographical unit. And if you go even smaller, you see this effect doesn't change that much anymore. All the drop comes at the beginning from jurisdiction to tract, which is our measure on neighborhood. So we're going to interpret this residual inequality after controlling for very small location. We're going to interpret this as being the within component or the within neighborhood component of inequality. And this will be the between or the neighborhood component of inequality. And again, this is 6 to 7% comes from neighborhood, 5 to 6% comes from within. Now, why does this neighborhood, this large effect of 6 to 7% occur? So one important reason why this may be happening is because there's misvaluation in the way assessments are constructed relative to market prices. So in order to actually test for that, what we need to see, it's good to remark that neighborhoods in the United States look quite different from one another. You have like places that have more minorities critically have a different minority share, and this is sounds tautological, but we know that minority share does have an impact on the value of home. It have different levels of unemployment, SNAP benefits, homeowner percentage, Gini coefficient, and you can take many other characteristics. They are very different from each other. So we would like to test whether or not assessors are actually tracking down these differences accurately. If they are being equitable in the way they implemented their assessment practices, they should be getting it right. They should be getting the market value of a home regardless of what it is. So what we can do is do exactly what assessors are supposed to do. We compute a hedonic price regression, where we're going to have the value of the home on the left-hand side variable. This can be either the market value of the home or the assessment value. We're going to do this twice. And then we're going to regress it against jurisdiction year fixed effect that we mentioned before. And we're going to regress it against all the structural characteristics of the home. By structural characteristics, I mean the number of bathrooms, the number of bedrooms, the square footage, whether or not it has a fireplace or not, a pool, things like that. Everything that is structured will be in this particular vector X. And then everything that is location, like unemployment rate, like minority share, things like that, are going to be in the different vector W. And the intention is to do this for both a market value and for assessment value, and compare them how these estimates look against each other. In other words, to look how the assessors, when they look the assessment, value property characteristics and location characteristics, in comparing against how the market does. So we can see this in the over here. Here, these black bars are exclusively property attributes. We have the bathroom, fireplace, year built, pool, patio, and square footage. And here, being close to zero is better. It means that the assessors are actually be more accurate, that the difference between the assessors and the market is very small if you're close to zero. So here you see everything is close to zero. It means the assessors are doing a pretty good job evaluating homes when they are looking at the structural characteristics of the home. But the problem is when we look at the non-structural characteristics of the home, when we look at the location attributes of the home. So here you see that assessors are doing quite a poor job across every potential dimension. And it's particularly poor when we see that the Black Hispanic share has a clear impact on the value of a home, the proxies for many other location attributes, but the assessors are not tracking that accurately. So this misvaluation is one of the sources that we have. And we show here also in this table that again, when we include Black share in our assessments, you see that the effect of the neighborhood component starts disappearing. This starts becoming smaller because it's being absorbed by the Black share and Hispanic share, which is exactly what assessors should be doing. So taking stock, we have 10 to 13% tax burden. We have two components, neighborhood and individual. And the neighborhood component can be attributed to a large degree to assessors on the weighting neighborhood characteristics for some areas. And what they are doing here is they are overvaluing the properties of minority communities, and they are undervaluing properties of a white community. Now, we would like also to know what's happening with the median variation. And there's many things that may be happening, why an individual that is a minority inside the same community of a white homeowner is paying more. And I will show you one evidence of one potential channel that in our data explains about 50% of this within variation channel. And that's like the evidence of structural inequality in the appeal system. This is consistent with other literature that has shown that in many institutions, including in medical treatment and in banking, like Blacks are going to be having a little bit of more problems in both receiving the attention or the services that they do, and also in trusting these institutions because of historical problems that they have had in the past. So we use data from the second largest county in the United States, that's Cook County, home to Chicago. That they have data, administrative microdata and appeals that is not available for the United States as a whole. And I'm going to show you that there's levels of inequality are rising from the appeal system. And then I'm going to show you that it's consistent with trends at the national level from our core data set. So for Cook County, we have appeals from 2003 to 2015, 3.5 million of them. You usually need to hire an attorney to actually do this, which implies that you need to have information, you need to have a reasonable amount of income to do this. And it also implies that you need to have a home that is actually appealing enough to be worth the time of the attorney. We have information on the appeals files, the win-loss rate, and the amount of the reduction. And over here, these are the results that we have in the appeals in Cook County. Appeals, Black and Hispanic mortgage holders are significantly less likely to appeal. This is consistent again with both frictions in having access to the appeal system and lack of trust. And also conditional on appealing, they are significantly less likely to win. In conditional on winning, the reduction is significantly smaller. So throughout the whole process, minority communities are going to be struggling in the process of appeal. And this is consistent with the national data that we have. How do we do this? We can look at assessment and see what happens within the same home, what happens when the race of the ethnicity of the homeowner changes. So you have a Puerto Rican person like me, I sell to a white person, or vice versa. In this case, what we see is that immediately after you see the change in the ethnicity, you have higher growth for Black and Hispanics than you immediately after the change of ethnicity in the property. So that's something that shouldn't happen unless there's something mediated inside the home itself, like appeals. I don't know how much time do I have. I think I still have some time. So there's a few things that I haven't, in this format, I don't get interrupted by questions. So let me tell a little bit about some things I believe are important and you may ask about later. So one thing we may ask is whether or not this problem is coming from market prices. The market prices are indeed too skewed for individuals themselves, and that's driving the findings. So what we find is, in this case, that we can construct the particular prices and see whether or not Blacks and Hispanics are paying a premium or discount for the home that they have. If they are paying a discount, then it means that the numerator, the assessment ratio, the market part, may be driving part of the effect. If it's a premium, it means that what we have is an underestimate. And that what we have is that Black and Hispanic homeowners are actually paying a premium every time they buy they are receiving a premium every time they sell a home. And that is consistent with evidence that we have in the past. So it means that our estimates are actually, if anything, they are an underestimate. They are not really driven by the denominator. Something else that would be interesting to look at is whether or not there's something that is driven just by assessors consistently undervaluing high-priced properties or overvaluing low-home price properties. So what we can do to do this is we can do a few things. We can control for attributes of the property. So we can control for bathrooms, bedrooms, structural characteristics of the home. And we can actually use those structural characteristics to construct a synthetic price for which we control as well. And in this case, if we control for attributes, or if we control for price in this case, in both instances, you still have large levels of inequality. So you see the inequality here is 12%, here as well, and here's 9 and here's 9. So the inequality doesn't change that much. Something else, if you instrument for price, this effect doesn't go away either. And moreover, if you look at the inequality within different median home values in each neighborhood, so you have a tract neighborhood and you see the median value in that neighborhood, the inequality is actually larger for places that have low home values. No, it's not smaller. And it's for very high value places that the inequality becomes smaller. So it means it's not really driven by systematic undervaluation of overvaluation of homes, of low value homes. This is a racial gradient that exceeds that problem. Here makes a point a little bit more explicit. If you look at low value homes, neighborhoods with low value homes, and you see that they are high minority communities, then the assessment gap is way larger than if they are low minority communities. And even for high value homes, for high minority communities, you will have a larger assessment gap. So the problem persists regardless of what are the average value of the homes in those areas. Something else we can do is to see if within a neighborhood, perhaps like minority communities and whites are sorting into different homes. Some homes are larger than others, and perhaps you still have that problem. But here we do the same analysis. We see the analysis we had before. We are controlling for different attributes. All, again, square footage, like bathroom, bedroom, so on, everything that we have. And we see that the effects do decrease a little bit, but by not that much. This is in a jurisdiction, you have a reduction of only 1 percentage point. And this is within neighborhood, about 1 percentage point as well. And here within block group is less than 1. And it doesn't matter how we construct this, we have different specifications, this will still be the case. Minority, this is not an artifact of minority sorting into different neighborhoods. And something else I would like to show you is that difference in income. If you look at difference in income, these are not driving the results either. You see income at the neighborhood level, the effects that we have are larger in places that have low levels of income. And if you even control for personal income of the individual, this is for the individual component, you will see that the effect is still about the 5 to 6% that we documented before. So income is not driving our effects either. We also show, I'm not showing you here, but we also show this effect is significantly larger the more segregated the locations are. And these effects are larger also in places that there's more racial animus. That doesn't mean that it's direct intentional discrimination where it's leading the result, but because it may mediate through the institutions themselves. But it's consistent with race playing a big role in driving this effect. And we have many other robustness checks that we can talk about in the Q&A or in a one-to-one meeting in the future. The last thing I would like to use with my time is just to explain how we can correct for this inequality. And then what we can do is construct a different way of doing the assessment. The problem with the assessment is it's relying too much on structural characteristics of the home and doesn't take into account location. That's like a little bit of the problem. There's some fundamental misvaluation that cannot be corrected, and you don't want assessors including race in their regressions anyway. That's not the right way of correcting. But we can find a very simple algorithm to actually correct assessments in a way that take into account location differences that are driving this misvaluation. So one potential algorithm is the following. At time 0, you take the assessment to be exactly the market value that you observe in the data. So remember, we were talking about sales taxes. The sales taxes don't have the problem because you tax exactly the point at the point of sale. So we're going to do something similar. We can take the first assessment to be the first sale, and then the second 1 year from now, that assessment will be as the initial assessment adjusted for home price growth, and then so on. And then eventually we can compare when there's another market sale, we can compare how this synthetic assessment performs relative to the normal assessment process. So we can see at the second cell, we can compare the synthetic assessment with the normal assessment ratio. And this is the normal assessment ratio. So for the realized, you have the effect that we documented before. But for the synthetic, all of these disappear. And in fact, this effect reverses a little bit to the other side. This is all using zero data, public data. Assessors have better data than what we are using publicly, so they can do a better job. The only intention of presenting this is to show that there's something that is feasible and easy to implement. So technically implementing a correction is not a problem. If this is not corrected, it's more for political reasons rather than for technical reasons. So to conclude, there's 3 points I want you to remember from this presentation. First, there's a 10 to 13% higher property tax burden for minorities in the US. This second point, there's 2 channels driving this effect. One is a geographic channel, and another one is a homeowner or within neighborhood channel. The neighborhood channel is mostly driven by insufficient sensitivity to local attributes when assessments are being computed. And the second channel, to a large degree, is driven by deep racial differentials in appeal behavior and the outcome, like the outcomes are quite different. The third point I want you to remember is that this problem is correctable. I'm not saying that the solution we're proposing is the right solution, but we are showing that it is feasible to correct. So I think I finished 4 minutes early, but I'm open to questions at this point.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Carlos, for a super interesting presentation. So we do have a few questions here. So I think I'll start with this one. It's sort of more of a background question, how you got interested in this question to begin with.
Yeah, so I used to be working with law before becoming an economist. And after I started doing my PhD, I used to do a lot of volunteering work for housing clinic in the Bay Area. So we used to work with evictions and in many problems related to housing, mostly for underserved communities. They didn't have neither the income, and sometimes they didn't even have the language. So a lot of the work I would do wasn't even really legal. It was a lot of translation. And in the process of translating, just like lawsuits to fault in Spanish, we have these conversations, and something that will recurrently come is like things that will put them in a difficult situation, especially for homeowners that were facing foreclosures. They really would raise a lot the problem of property tax. The property tax were too high. They were not saying that they were relatively high relative to other communities. They didn't know that, but they did suspect it. They would just complain about it, and then I started working with this, with that intuition from the field.
All right, thanks. That's super interesting to hear about how your law background informed this economics research question. I'll ask a question now about, and this is something we actually had at the Fed. We had a speaker come in this week to talk about racism in public finance, and this idea that policies that aren't explicitly designed necessarily with racial animus can result in kind of racist outcomes. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how the legacy of redlining and residential segregation is actually generating these higher assessments for minority neighborhoods.
Yeah, exactly. I like that point. I think we can break it down into intentional discrimination that can be individual or collective. We can have institutions reflecting the historical racism from their own institution. And then you can have institutions that have never had an intentional discrimination, but still amplify discrimination that is being mirrored from other areas. So in this particular case, there's historical evidence that at least in some areas of the US, the property tax system was intended to be discriminatory. That doesn't mean that it was intended to be discriminatory in the way I'm discussing today. I'm not adjudicating such level of sophistication to 200 years ago potential I don't know, builders of the institution, but there's some evidence that there will be some intention. But that intention is not necessary for what I'm showing here. Even in areas where that wasn't the case, we have the legacy segregation that would generate differences in where the communities are, and also will affect the value of the homes directly. And we know by a lot of the historical record that these communities are underserved. There's public policies that were directly enacted to actually make sure Blacks didn't live in some areas, that they didn't receive funding in some areas, that were developments that were of high quality were not open to them. And this happened throughout the United States. Definitely happened in Chicago, definitely happening in California. And you have a zoning restriction, land use. All of this will affect the value of the property. These are things that the market is pricing and is disproportionately falling into Black communities. And if assessors are not taking into account the fact that all these characteristics of the area are affecting the price, they are putting an extra burden on Black communities because Black communities were forced to be in those areas. There wasn't really a choice to be in many of these neighborhoods.
I'm really curious of the graph you show where Indiana does so well and others do so poorly. Did you investigate what could explain those state differences?
Yes. So one of the main drivers of how poorly some places do, like Illinois was the worst, in Indiana wasn't. It's the level of the legacy segregation. The higher the segregation there is, the higher the levels of inequality. So Chicago is extremely segregated, and most of the inequality from Illinois actually comes from Cooktown. It comes from other cities too, comes from larger cities where many blacks came after the first and second wave of migration. Indiana doesn't have that level of segregation. To some degree in Indianapolis, for the most part, it's a fairly homogeneous place where like blacks are scattered. So you don't have that level. They consistently throughout, in most of our examples, places that are more segregated have this problem more places that are not segregated even here in the South. One state that actually is doing well for institutional reasons as well is Texas. So Texas doesn't have the level of segregation that other places have, even when it does have more segregation than between people in general. But there's an institutional feature why Texas is doing better than other places, is that Texas relies a lot on property taxation for their funding. Like they have some of the highest property tax. So they have boards in several boards that actually go over assessment to ensure that they are made equitable. Not necessarily equitable with respect to race, but with respect to many different dimensions that eventually lead to more equitability on race. So there's definitely institutional factors playing here, but the main factor that is overall and is national would be segregation.
Is there, I wonder whether there could be, in a sense, a negative effect coming out by equalizing this in the following sense, right? What is happening here, in a sense, you are still taxing the homeowner, right? And so could it be that an unpleasant consequence of maybe, creating this as a different system, even though you make it more equal, is that now, there is less transfer. Suppose that you get less taxes. I mean, I know we are not keeping everything equal, right? But it could happen. And then I have kind of a related question, that it could happen that, even though we are taxing more this homeowner, then perhaps we could use those taxes to give it to the people who are not homeowner, so even the Black and Hispanics. And so we are, in a sense, transferring, in terms of policy to maybe people who are not homeowner. And so there could be this effect, even though you could argue, well, tax the white, right, not tax those people. And connected to this is, I wonder whether there is an effect, or if you try to see whether there is an effect of the race of the mayor in those different cities. So if you are, a Hispanic mayor or a high administration, would this be less likely to happen?
We haven't looked at this, and that's a great question. Something else we have in our to-do list for another project, because it's extent. We want to look at how politics affect this. And something else we were thinking is the difference between having a political elected mayor and a city manager. Because we have evidence, and I have a different paper, I show that having a city manager, you are more insulated from politics than a mayor is. And that generates different reducing inequality. So we want to look at that. We haven't. So that's a great suggestion. Thank you for bringing it up. We haven't. But to the level of transfers, the transfer has to be very specific, because there's levels of inequality that are beyond what we have shown. I show you only what is within taxing jurisdiction, but if you look at a county or city, when we're thinking about politics, the inequality is actually larger, because there's also across jurisdiction levels of inequality. Within jurisdiction, the transfers matter a little bit less, in the sense that everybody is exposed to same level of public good provision. So there may be individual differences in the uptake. So you may be in a school district where you don't have kids and some other people do, but you are all subject to the same level of public good provision. And that's like a little bit what makes this a little bit so difficult to digest, is that they survive in either when you have this public good provision. Or to the across jurisdiction, this public level of provision matters a lot. And that's what I would expect, that if we see like a major city manager, the effect on that cross-jurisdiction inequality is probably larger, because they probably can handle that well with state, even not only like city transfer, but also state level transfers and so on.
This is so interesting.
So another question that came in is just about the impact of having to bear this larger property tax burden. So question is, you know, if these families, you motivated this with the racial wealth gap, you know, there's likely to be a less of the minority households are likely to have less of a financial buffer, potentially if there's a financial shock that they have to face. So how much, you know, do these kind of extra taxes that they're paying maybe contribute to additional, increase the likelihood that this is actually going to, that these households are going to enter, you know, financial distress? I mean, I think it's almost sort of related to this question of gentrification and, you know, are the property values rising, and is that going to, you know, and the tax burden's higher, and so is that really going to push people, you know, into kind of financial distress or make them more vulnerable to shocks?
So I'm here, I'm speaking outside the paper, but I also think there's evidence about this. So we can think about Matthew Desmond's Addicted, and I think that book I mentioned a lot because it makes a clear, a point that is, especially for professionals and people like us, it's very hard to see. But for many people, just having your car break down, like pay $500, is enough for you to miss all. If you don't rebuild your car, if you don't like take care of it, you cannot do a job. So you will really have to like take care of your car. But that means you may not pay your rent, and then you may be evicted. Eviction has a lot of consequences. You lose your property, your mobile property, and so on. $800 or $390, depending if you look at the median or the 90%, is quite a bit of money. It's like literally it's one of these shocks you're trying to insure against. And this many people, like a large minority of Americans, lives in this type of situation. So this will have financial distress that will extend beyond just what you're paying. About the gentrification is another interesting topic. So something I was literally talking with a car driver, an Uber driver in Austin, Texas, is about how like many Hispanic communities that used to be in Austin is losing a lot of Hispanic share. I've been driven out because the property taxes are so high and the value of the property is increasing so fast that they cannot keep pace with the property taxation. So that accelerates the gentrification issue. There's a paper by a researcher at UVA Law that actually shows that this dynamic of gentrification may contribute, that this dynamic of property taxing may contribute to gentrification. So yes, so definitely there's evidence, even if it's not inside the paper, that this financial distress can have other consequences later on and also can affect gentrification.
So I have to say, and we are getting close to coming to the end, and I just want to save a couple of minutes if there are no more questions, Erin. Did you see more questions?
No, we can close here.
Yeah, because I wanted to mention a couple of things. I really saw that this was such a great way to end the seminar series, because as you know, Carlos, we are very interested when we invite our speaker to really touch upon important topics. And I cannot think of a more important one than this one. I think, you know, people who work on financial literacy and personal finance, I think, touch upon topics that not just are important for academic work, but that are important for the lives of people. And your paper could not be, is just a great example of that. It also made me think that, you know, how important it is to have not just a PhD, but a law degree. And I just, you know, could appreciate today how much, you know, that perspective brings, you know, to the research and so on. And so I just thought that, you know, you really brought a unique perspective to this topic. and perhaps adding even more how important it is to address this. And I love that, not only you identify a problem, but there was this interesting solution that you are proposing. So, I'm so grateful that you could come today and you could end our seminar series with this great paper. And I want to ask now to Kristen Archana and Kristen to turn on the video, because first of all, I want to say, there are these people behind our seminar series that are helping us, and both Erin and Kristen are on the, are on the committee that are choosing papers. So as you can see, we make really great choices. And we want to actually wish all of you a very happy holiday season. And we want also to tell you that we have met a couple of days ago. So we already have the speakers for a list of great speakers for next semester. I think it's going to be hard to match people which have multiple degrees and do such interesting analysis, which have important implication for policy, but this is really what we are looking for. So thank you all for being here today. Thank for this incredible team, in particular the FED team. Happy holidays to all of you. And let me just say goodbye.
Hey, thank you so much.
Thank
Happy
you.
holidays.
Thank you, Carlos. It was nice, great to have you. Bye-bye.